I'm willing to admit that I've emulated a lot of games over the years. Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Game Boy Advance, even some DS in recent years when Mario 3D All-Stars came out and I missed the DS remake of 64. But none of those platforms came even close to how many times I've emulated the Nintendo 64 and Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time since their initial launch back in the 90s. When it came to emulators coming to Nintendo Switch Online, the moment I saw Ocarina and Star Fox 64, I was so happy. Now, do I still have a new 2DS XL and cartridge for Ocarina of Time 3D? Yes, I do. But playing these games on the go again, even if it's in their original form, is always such a thrill. Here is my review of the Nintendo 64 app for Nintendo Switch Online. Before diving in, let's go over what we're not doing. There's been so much drama, articles, and overall negativity about this service and app. We will not be talking about or judging the N64 app based on the price of Nintendo Switch Online's expansion pass. We're simply going to be looking at the games emulated, the choices they made, and how the emulation is done. So if you're here to listen to someone complaining about the expansion pass price, this is not the video for you. Moving on. This app gives you a list of games to begin playing along with options for single player, local player, and online multiplayer. It's very similar to the NES and SNES apps we already had. Because of that, this is also restricted to friendless players. Let us first take a moment to look at the catalog available at launch. The big sellers of this are of course Star Fox 64 and The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. We do have Super Mario 64, but the Switch technically already has this via 3D All-Stars. We've also got some other first-party games like Mario Kart 64, Mario Tennis, and Yoshi's Story. There are a couple obscure third-party titles as well, but I think the 4 Mario titles, Star Fox, and especially Ocarina are the big sellers. And overall, I think the variety is decent. Only having 9 titles at launch does seem a bit low, but the fact that we know that we're getting games like Majora's Mask and especially Banjo-Kazooie in the future, it's not bad. Plus, Ocarina of Time is a massive time sink all on its own. Next, let's talk about the features and ROM versions. The N64 ROMs are fairly old, which have ups and downs. For example, Super Mario 64 is based on the ROMs from before the Shindo version that patched out the ability to do back long jumps, a known tactic for speedrunners. When we look at Ocarina of Time, this is more based around 1.2 that had some weird changes like Ganondorf's blood and a redone Fire Temple theme. Now once you boot each ROM up, you have similar features to the older Nintendo Switch Online apps. You can create and load suspend points to take advantage of save states. These can be done at any time in any game, making a lot of the tricky puzzles, especially in Mario 64 and Zelda, much easier to handle. However, the rewind feature from those earlier apps was not given to the N64. Next, let's talk about how the games look and perform. Visually, they're upscaled, at least to a point. The colors are a bit richer and they look a tiny bit less blurry. If you want to make a direct comparison, we can look at Mario 64 from this app right here, and then switch over to the same Mario 64 found in 3D All-Stars. Both versions are upscaled and looked good, but the N64 app isn't quite as smooth around the textures as 3D All-Stars port. They certainly look better than their original versions, just not by a huge scale. There are some weird differences, however, in Ocarina of Time, as many people on the internet know well. Go into the area where you fight Dark Link, and the fog doesn't render properly, so it looks a little different in the background. Now with performance, I would directly compare this to running the games on a PC emulator like Project 64. The frame rate isn't perfect, as I saw many small frame dips in Ocarina of Time and even little bits of slowdown when mashing sword strikes on bosses like Queen Goma, but it looks pretty similar to how the games were on the original platform. That goes for input lag as well, something that a lot of people have been complaining about. There is a bit of controller lag when playing these, and I did a couple tests on that. Running Ocarina of Time on the app with the 3DS remake, this app had about twice as much input lag. However, the amount of lag you get here is the same amount I get from running version 1.2 on Project 64 via my laptop. It is true that the NES and SNES apps didn't have this much delay, but it is pretty small and easy to adjust to. Speaking of that controller lag, let us talk about the control scheme. Obviously, the Switch doesn't have the same amount of buttons as the original N64 controller. To accommodate, they put the Z button on ZL and divided up the C buttons. You can use the right analog stick in all 4 directions for each of those C buttons, but you also have the left and down of those buttons attached to X and Y. Alternatively, you can also hold ZR and that turns the 4 face buttons into the C buttons as well. Now overall, this setup isn't terrible. None of the games I played absolutely had to use all C buttons for a crucial moment. Mario Kart had items tied to the ZL button. The C buttons attached to X and Y are what lets you use aerial moves in Star Fox, and having only 2 face buttons for items in Ocarina of Time is just like it was on the 3DS. It does take time to realize that the right stick are the C buttons and not camera controls, but it works. Now let's move on to battery life. The N64 app gives the original model a battery range of 4 hours and 11 minutes up to 5 hours and 47. It gives the Nintendo Switch Lite a range of 4 hours and 36 to 6 hours and 51. The Redboxer V2 2019 model gets a range of 8 hours and 22 to 9 hours and 49. And the Nintendo Switch OLED gets a range of 9 hours and 18 to 10 hours and 3. As we wrap this up, the Nintendo 64 app isn't perfect, but does a decent job at bringing classic adventures like Star Fox 64 and Ocarina of Time to the Nintendo Switch. While there are some weird visual changes and input lag comparable to PC emulation, it is a lot of fun to revisit these older games on the Switch. Reviews to go. Rates the Nintendo 64 app a 7 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. Thank you for watching and have a great day.